Once the Formula One Grand Prix city of Australia, Adelaide is fighting back on the sporting stage, even if it still faces some energy and economic challenges. The V8 supercars return to the famed Adelaide Street Circuit next month after the event was scrapped 2 years ago. And there are other major sporting events on their way to South Australia too. I caught up with the State Premier just a few minutes ago. Peter Malinauskas, thanks so much for joining us. Let me start off with the V8s. You must be so excited about getting the V8s back onto the Adelaide Street Circuit. I can't believe that the previous government scrapped them.
Yeah, we are very excited about it, Chris. In fact, more than that, we know that the rest of the country's getting excited about it. Only yesterday I got an update on ticket sales and it's actually outperforming our best expectations. So we're looking forward to not just the track being a place of much entertainment, but just as importantly, and in fact more importantly from my perspective, every hotel room full. We want restaurants chock-a-block. We want all that economic activity, particularly in the industries that paid the biggest prices during the course of COVID.
Yeah, it's fantastic, giving people a reason to go to Adelaide, and you're doing more in that area. You've got what is really the magic round. They don't want to use that term because it's a rip-off from NRL, but the AFL having all games in Adelaide and around in April next year. You've also got a live golf tournament, the first of those in Australia happening. So this is a big push to make Adelaide a bit of an event city again.
It is. Look, I'm not Jeff Kennett's biggest fan, Chris, and he had a range of policies that I obviously don't agree with. But one thing I think Kennett did well for Melbourne and Victoria was major events attraction. And we had a deliberate policy that we decided to pursue, and that is to attract major events to our city. When we put them on, we know South Australians back them in, and people enjoy travelling here and having a great experience, not just in the city, but going out to our wine regions, whether it be the McLaren Vale or the Barossa Valley. We just need to get people here in the first instance. So whether it be the biggest motorsport event for the V8s in the country, whether it be live golf, whether it be the Magic Round, which is going to be bigger than Ben-Hur, we see them all as an opportunity to drive growth and demand in what is ultimately a very labour-intensive industry. The thing about tourism, it is labour-intensive. You can't replace those services with a machine. So we want to generate that sort of work as much as we can in South Australia, particularly post-COVID. So we're very excited about it, and we see the rest of the country being equally as excited about it, which justifies, I think, the policy decision.
Well, the downside, though, when you talk about this, to discuss them in a political context, is the government money, the taxpayers' money that goes into these events. These are commercially successful, wealthy sporting organisations. Why the need to put taxpayers' money in to attract these events?
Well, all of the funding that we're putting into these events is principally into the hosting of them. So, the expenditure from the state budget in respect to the Adelaide 500 and Live Golf is going exclusively into the hosting of the event themselves. Similarly, the bulk of the contribution with the AFL Magic Round is realising the fact there is a cost to putting on an extra round of footy, which this is. But we've done our numbers and we're pretty certain that the investments that we're making in every respect delivers a net benefit to the South Australian economy, as we've seen it done in other parts of the world where this sort of policy is being pursued. You want to do it carefully, and I think I've been very public about the fact that we didn't have an unlimited bucket of funds to compete with New South Wales with in respect to the AFL Magic Round. So we've put our best foot forward in every regard that we can. We acknowledge there's a degree of controversy attached to this on occasions, and that should be there. I mean, the expenditure of taxpayers' funds should be scrutinised in every respect. But we're confident that we're making the right decisions for the objectives that we have. And now we've just got to work our level best to make sure we realise that long-term dividend that we expect from people who are coming to South Australia for the first time.
All right, let me ask you about a few national issues that play out through state politics as well. One is energy. We keep being told by so many sources, including the federal Labor government, that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, yet your state has the highest penetration of renewable energy and has the highest electricity prices in the national grid. Surely that's a warning to the rest of the country.
Well, you're right, Chris. We have pursued aggressively as a state renewable energy. We see it as being the future of energy around the world, certainly in Australia and definitely here in South Australia. We don't have the large coal reserves. In fact, we don't have coal reserves really in South Australia at all in comparison to New South Wales or Queensland. So we've got to use the resources that are available to us. Gas is still an important component of the South Australian electricity system, but we're very proud of the fact that 64% of all of the energy produced in South Australia is renewable. And in fact, more than that, Chris, we're leaning in on it with our pursuit of building a hydrogen electrolyser and power plant, which will be the world's largest. Now, in terms of price, I think it depends on when you look and how you look at it. There are various analyses around the country, and then there are instances where South Australia is leading the rest of the country. But the simple fact is this, the transition is on away from decarbonised energy. It needs to be done in a thoughtful way. It can't be done recklessly, and we certainly have the view that gas has a transition to play, but ultimately the objective is to decarbonise our energy supply as a country, which is good for industry and good for jobs in the long term.
One of your Labor predecessors, Jay Weatherill, bravely looked at nuclear. He conducted a Royal Commission, the scarce Royal Commission. It found that South Australia could make a lot of money out of nuclear waste, and there was also potential for nuclear energy. Will you consider reopening that investigation and going down that path at any time?
Well, Chris, I'm on the record and have been for some time, well before I went into Parliament, that I actually think nuclear power does have a role to play, because the simple fact is it's a baseload source of energy that is decarbonised, virtually no carbon emissions. So it should be a technology that's on the table globally in our effort to decarbonise. The question in an Australian context, and particularly a South Australian context, is it economic? Can the capital cost, which is very, very substantial, in fact, nuclear power stations are the most expensive form of power to build in a capital sense. Can that ever be done in such a way as economic? And what the Scarce Royal Commission found at that time was that it's not economic, particularly in a South Australian context. Now, if you look at where nuclear power around the world works, Chris, of course, it's in major population bases that have many multiples the population of South Australia, in fact, even the whole of the country, and where there is a massive industrial demand for the energy. That tends to be the circumstances where the economic stacks up. Whereas in South Australia, we have got a very, very relatively small population base globally, with one of the largest areas to transmit energy around. So it doesn't work in a South Australian context. Naturally, we have to contemplate technological changes in the future. But at the moment, our energy and our capital as a state is being invested in the hydrogen opportunity that we believe in deeply.
OK, let me get your thoughts on pandemic management. Unlike the other premiers, you weren't around really during the lockdowns. You became premier as you were able to bring your state out of the pandemic effectively. So therefore, you can give us a frank assessment of the way other state governments, including South Australia, handled it. And do you agree that we went too hard, too many lockdowns, too many border closures, too many restrictions, all the evidence now saying it was unnecessary to at least some degree?
Well, the first point is I've been working hard to... What I've done differently to the former government is establish a cabinet committee that is responsible for all the key governance arrangements around COVID, and I, as quickly as I can, ended the emergency management declaration, which means the cabinet and then ultimately I, as the chair of cabinet, accept our responsibility as elected officials. But, Chris, in a way that might disappoint some of your viewers, I am reticent, if not loath, to make judgments or criticisms of former governments, including the Liberal government here in South Australia, with the value of hindsight. I said this as Leader of the Opposition at the time, as I think you're aware. I think the government of the day, when it came to these critical COVID decisions, was making the best judgments available to them in the circumstances they were confronted with. Now, an analysis after the fact with the value of hindsight is legitimate, and I don't discourage that. But what I would say is I'm not going to be the guy that thumps the table and calls everyone fools for the way they handled it.
I respect that, but it's important for the future. I notice your own Chief Medical Officer, Nicola Spurrier, now suggesting that people should be wearing masks. Surely you don't want to get back into mandates and restrictions again? No,
I am of the view, Chris, that we should be seeking to avoid the reinstatement of restrictions and mandates. I think we're in a different phase of the pandemic. Vaccination rates are high here in South Australia. The overall majority of South Australians have had COVID. We think that puts us in a different position. We've thrown a lot more resources at the health system. I think we've sought to graduate out of the situation. I think we are evolving to a circumstance where personal responsibility is something that should be allowed to flourish. I do think that, individually we have responsibilities to our community around us, and we've got to accept that personal responsibility isn't just the rights of the individual, it's the concern more broadly in our society. And I think those sorts of judgments should be allowed to occur. And my view is that the reinstatement of restrictions and mandates is something that it would have to take a very substantial or drastic change in the circumstance for us to contemplate that actively as a government.
Look, just one out of left field before I let you go, Premier. Your colleague in Victoria, the Labor Premier there, Daniel Andrews, is making sanitary products free for all women all the time because he says they're a necessity, not a luxury. Would you contemplate such a free giveaway of these products for all time in South Australia?
Well, we are looking at that policy in the instance of some school-based environments, Chris. We do think that in schools there is an appropriate role for government. But
this is for all women all the time.
Well, we'll pay close attention to what is happening in Victoria. I'm not going to come on your program and completely discount that policy. I saw the announcement; it's significant. It's certainly new in its nature, and we'll observe it closely and assess whether or not that is rolling out in a way that is practical. I understand the policy merit of the proposition, and I see the legitimacy of the argument in favour of it, and it's something we'll observe closely.
All right, Peter Malinauskas, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks, Chris. Cheers.